Hello everyone, welcome back. This is History with Hilbert, and today I'm going to be talking about Viking names. Now, again, I'm using Vikings in quotation marks because it's now the popular name for the people who came from Scandinavia during this period, although Viking was an occupation. So that now that's out of the way, I'm going to be talking about the Viking names and surnames. But first of all, I'll be having a look at some of the first names as well. So here I have put quite a few of the more common surnames used by people who went Viking. So, or first names rather, actually. So these are some of the common first names, and with a lot of these first names, we see that they are compound names. And basically, what compound means is that you have used more than one word to make another. So, for example, in English, you have the word rainbow, made from rain and bow, and it's the same with names. So, one name that this is an example of is Thorstein, and Thorstein can be broken down into Thor, who was the god of thunder, and Stein, which meant stone. So then you get Thor's stone. Now, you can do this with lots of names. Now, a lot of the ones that I showed on the previous page were also compound names. And for example, you have Thorolf, you have Ragnar, and Arnbjorn. These are all compound names. And in fact, my name, Hilbert, is also a compound name, although it's important to remember that Hilbert is a Frisian name rather than a Viking name. So Hilbert is made up of Hild, which means battle, and Bert, which means bright. So you've actually got these two in Old Norse and Old English as well. Now, if you think of Ragnhild, that is a female name, I believe, which means something like divine battle. And Bert is used in Old English names like Ecbert or Athelbert, which meant noble, bright, that kind of thing. So it's used a lot in Germanic languages, these different forms of compound names. And I think I might make a whole video about the name Hilbert, because I know it seems a bit vain, but it's quite an interesting name. I think you guys might quite enjoy that. So anyway, now that we move on to surnames, and this is really the point that I want to make in this video. Ragnar Lothbrok. Now, Ragnar Lothbrok, his name can also be broken down into compounds. Now, actually, his first name and his surname can be broken down into compounds. Now, I showed on the previous page that Ragnar can be broken down to mean something like God's soldier. And when I'm saying gods, I don't necessarily mean the Christian God. I mean like divine or God. Ragan initially meant something like ruler. So that's where we get the divine aspect. And then Ar meant something like warrior, or came from, I believe, army. That sort of root is Ar. So Luthbrok actually can be broken down as well. And Luth meant hairy, and then Broek meant breeches or trousers. Now, still in a lot of languages, like in Dutch, you have broek means trousers. And in Old English, you had this change from the Germanic hard C or K sound. So brok to CH to a ch sound. So you have fisk in, I think, Old Norse, and then in Old English you have fish. So you see this difference. And you have here Luth and Brok. And then people will wonder why he's called Hairy Breeches. And the story behind it is that he actually fought a worm, or this large serpent. It's not like a tiny worm that comes out of the ground, but worms in Germanic myth were these big sort of wingless dragon type creatures. And this serpent, or I think it was a lindworm in the story, was protecting a princess in a tower. And her father said any man who slays this worm can marry the princess. And the princess's name was Auslag. So he fights this worm, and then to stop himself being bitten, he wore these hairy breeches. That's roughly how the story goes. But now, in shows like Vikings, which I am currently watching, and I am on season 5, and they did this in just the last episode, which really inspired me to make this video, is that they'll say, well, okay, so the father is called Ragnar Lothbrok, so the son, Ivar, must be called Ivar Lothbrok, and Lagertha, when Ivar is challenging her to single combat, calls him Ivar Lothbrok. But this is absolute nonsense, because Lothbrok comes from the story of Ragnar defeating this worm. Ivar didn't defeat this worm, so why would Ivar get the name Lothbrok? It doesn't make any sense. And instead we see that this Ivar, is called Ivar the Boneless, because one story says that he might have had a disability. I can't remember. I think brittle bone disease is one of the options. Another one says that he couldn't pleasure a woman, and that's why they called him boneless, as a sort of joke. So there are a few theories about this. And as well, the other sons of Ragnar, and now it's important to remember with Ragnar Lothbrok that he quite likely never existed or is made up of several different chiefs to become one person so that people could claim descent from him. So that's actually an important point to make that I should have made earlier. But yeah, it's important to remember that Ragnar might never have existed and might have been invented by his quote-unquote sons to claim descent from. But these other sons of Ragnar Lothbrok are also called different things. So you have Sigurd Snake in the Eye, you have Björn Ironside, and you have Halfdan of the Wide Embrace. So, did they have surnames like the way we have surnames? Well, yes and no. So I showed the example of no there with things like these names that they get. So you also have things like Harald Finehair. You know, his son wouldn't be called Finehair because he doesn't have the story of having this hair that became so fine after he finally combed it again. But they did have a type of surname like we do. Now, if we look at the saga hero Egil Skallagrimsson, we see that there is a sort of continuation of this. Now, Skallagrim was Egil's father, and with a simple space and an apostrophe, we have an English construction here. He is Egil Skallagrim's son, and his brother Thorolf is Thorolf Skallagrimsson, because they are both the sons of Skallagrim. And you see this in even today in Icelandic names and some Scandinavian names. You have dottir, which means daughter of, and son at the end of the name. And you have this in English as well with son, and in Gaelic with mac, it means son of. So that is the way that they had this sort of surname. So if you had brothers, they could both be called what the father's name was and then son at the end, or with daughters what the mother's name was and then dottir at the end. So that is how they had a sort of similar way of surnames. But this doesn't work with names like Lothbrok or Tanglehair or Hardrada or any of these by-names, nicknames that they got. Alright everyone, I hope that you've enjoyed this quick video on the Viking quote-unquote names and surnames. I just thought I'd pick up on this because I saw it in Vikings, and I think they've done it before by calling Ragnar's brother Rollo Lothbrok as well. And by the way, they couldn't have been brothers. I've mentioned this before. Rollo lived much later than Ragnar. He could have been his granddad. But anyway, I've put some of the runes on top of these names, but it's important to remember with these runes that this runic script I'm using is the Elder Futhark, and the Elder Futhark went out of fashion before the Viking Age, and in fact the Vikings used what was known as the Younger Futhark, which was a different alphabet. I think it was based on the Elder Futhark, but it was tangibly different to this version that I'm using here. Now, a very interesting channel and a very interesting video and video series on Old Norse in general, and I would absolutely recommend you check this out, is Jackson Crawford, and I will link this in the description. He has several videos dedicated to Viking names, surnames, what they're made up of. So if you're interested in any of this kind of thing, I strongly recommend having a look at that, because he is a doctor at the University of California, Berkeley, I believe, and he's very educated on this, and he has lots and lots of videos on this type of thing, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. Alright everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this quick video. If you have any questions, please comment them below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This has been History with Hilbert.